Welcome to the Tuesday, July 21st, 2020 meeting of the Longmeadow School Committee. Per Governor Baker's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, the public will not be allowed to physically access this school committee meeting. School committee is using the Zoom meeting platform to conduct this meeting. LCTV is live streaming the meeting on Channel 12, and a recording of the meeting will be posted to the LCTV YouTube channel as soon as possible after the meeting. Just a reminder that all votes while participating remotely must be made by roll call vote. And just a point to make to everybody, we are currently looking at the rules to have these meetings back in person again. As we all know, we're going to be discussing having students go into school shortly. So it would be kind of weird if we continue to have Zoom meetings because of not being able to be near each other and yet send children to school. So we're looking into those rules. And once we determine what those rules are for us and our guests, we will get that out to everybody and then probably begin our meetings in person. Since we can't do the pledge because we are not together, we will now have a moment of silence. Thank you. Correspondence, Kevin?
An email letter dated July 6, 2020 from Mr. Doug Morin regarding the district's and school committee response to current events. An email letter dated July 6, 2020 from Ms. Mary Henshaw regarding a naming proposal for a former staff member. An email letter from Mr. Larry Malo dated July 9, 2020 regarding the furlough of staff. An email letter from Mr. Brahadesh Sivakumar dated July 5th, 2020 requesting an agenda item for the July 7th or 21st school committee meeting.
Thank you. The next agenda item is the approval of minutes. Is there a motion?
I move that the school committee approve the minutes for the July 7th, 2020 school committee meeting as presented.
So motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes from our last meeting? I can't see everybody at the moment, so if you do want to talk, please unmute yourself and give a shout, and then I will flick so that I can see you. All right, so seeing no discussion. Marty, can I get rid of the agenda so I can see everybody when I'm doing votes?
Sure, yeah. You want me to just stop the share?
Yeah, that makes it easier for me when I'm doing the votes so I can do people by their screen and not forget Jamie. So we're doing approval of minutes for the last meeting. Kevin?
Yes.
Bronwyn?
Yes.
Gianna?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Jamie?
He said he was having trouble with his audio.
Jamie, if you want to say yes to this, give me a thumbs up. If you want to say no, give me a thumbs down. Can you hear me? Jamie cannot hear me at the moment. I'm going to mute him and unmute him and see if that helps. Jamie, can you hear us?
Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just press pound to continue. You are in the meeting now. There are 15 participants in the meeting.
Jamie, you there?
Yeah, I'm on my phone. There's something up with my computer today, so I'm just gonna keep it on speaker.
Right now, we were voting on the minutes from the last meeting. Do you have a yes or no on that? Or do you have to comment on?
Nothing to comment on, and yes.
Okay, yes from me as well. Thank you, Jamie. Do we have any visitor comments? We have visitors with us. Visitors, same as I've said before. I can flick through the screens and try to find people, but if you unmute yourself and announce your intention to speak, then I'll be able to call on you. Seeing none, I'm going to move to the next item. School committee announcements and recognitions. Committee members, any announcements or recognitions?
Brian?
Yes, Gianna.
I was able to watch the graduation from a friend who live streamed it, and I just thought it was just amazing that it was just amazing. The speeches, the kids' speeches especially. So I just wanted to say thank you for everybody that pulled that off. We also had some seniors drive by our house on Saturday night, and they were just having a blast with that as well. So again, thank you to all the, I know there was a lot of parents and community members involved with that parade Saturday night. And then with Sunday's graduation, it was fantastic.
Anyone else? All right, I'm trying to look at everybody. Give me a second. Anybody waving their hand? So I have a few if nobody else has any they want to. So I also participated. I had the pleasure of being the first car in that senior parade on Saturday night. So a big congratulations to all the volunteers who made that happen. There are people standing on street corners. There were signs all over town. Great to see families who decided to come out in their front lawn and honk at the kids and wave at the kids. And it was really cool. We actually went around a second time just to see how many cars were in line. And it really seemed like the majority of the senior class showed up for that parade. So that was a great event. Well done by Mr. Landers and the teachers who lined the parking lot as the kids did a little zigzag through the parking lot in the cars. So it was really a wonderful event. Graduation, although roughly 110 degrees, was, I thought, amazing. Well done again by the high school staff, and all the student speakers were incredible. That was a very impressive event. Enjoyed being a part of it. And third, I have multiple things today. Third, Marty and I joined the Longmeadow Anti-Racism Coalition a week ago Monday, and we had a great conversation with that group. They're a very great group of people who are looking to help us come up with ways to improve the anti-racism curriculum, different things we're doing in the schools, as well as throughout the town. So really, that was a great discussion for us. We got great ideas from them. They asked us a lot of very intelligent, meaningful questions that we got to answer and tell them where we were coming from, what was in our power, and what we plan on doing. So it was a pleasure that they allowed us to join their group. And I don't know, Marty, if you want to add on to that, or if you're going to talk about that later.
I think we can maybe circle back to it when we talk about curriculum sub.
Yep, that makes sense. So that was a great conversation. And the last thing I want to point out, we have an award or a plaque that I'm not going to be able to hand over. It says, Armin Ray, in recognition of your service on the Longmeadow School Committee, September 2018 to June 2020, a plaque coming your way, and a pen. You can see that pen, Armin. It's in a special box. So thank you from the school committee for your diligent work on behalf of the students of Longmeadow Public Schools as a token of our appreciation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Armin.
Thank you.
You can say something, Armin. You always want.
Got nothing to say but thank you, and you guys keep up the good work. Thanks for the support.
Thank you, and for continuing to join us. Business with guests reopening update. Marty, this one's for you.
Sure. So thank you. Appreciate the chance to talk to the committee about where we are with our reopening plans. Just to touch on the timeline briefly, I think I've communicated this to the committee. The Department of Education is expecting our comprehensive plans on August 10th. And as part of that plan, we would demonstrate the approach that we would use if we are all in person, hybrid, or if we were fully remote. And also as part of that comprehensive plan, we would have to notify DESE what our preferred school committee adopted reopening plan is. And so that's August 10th. My thought at this stage, and Chairman Kelly and I talked about this, would be on August 4th, the committee would make a final vote, final determination on the reopening strategy that we would use. My expectation would be that next Tuesday, only 7 days away, July 28th, that the administrative team would come to you with with our 3 plans and with a recommendation. And then from July 28th to August 4th, that would be an opportunity for you to gather additional input or for us to answer any remaining questions that you might have, and then prepare you for the vote on August 4th. So July 28th, plan presentation by admin. August 4th, school committee vote. August 10th, submission of the plans to the Department of Education. So I'll stop there for a minute before I dive into some other details. I just want to see if you had any thoughts or questions on that timetable that I just described to you.
Committee members, any questions? Kevin?
Marty, you're essentially saying a special school committee meeting on July 28th may be needed. You're saying that will be needed.
I think that will be needed. Of course, I'm hoping that works for your schedules. And it would be exclusively, the way I see it, of course, it's there may be other agenda items that you want to tackle, but as I see it, it could be exclusively devoted to reopening. I know it's a tough time of year, and I know a lot is being asked of your schedules right now. But my hope is that if we can get to the August 4th meeting, we would be in a position to submit our plans to DESE on the 10th.
I would say that well, first of all, obviously we're having a more busy summer as a committee than usual, but this year is not usual. It's 2020. So I think we all understand the situation we're in, so we have to do this. But I like the idea of you presenting to us and then us having a week to think about it and come up with questions or anything we may want to discuss on the 4th before we vote. That gives everybody the opportunity to process what we're informed of and then come up with necessary questions, and then talk to people in town. People in town can come up to you and ask you questions in that week. And then it also gives people the opportunity to come themselves on that August 4th. Bronwyn, you have a question or a comment?
I just wanted to make sure I was clear on it. So the admin will present the 3 plans that you guys have come up with, and then the recommendation of how we're going to open.
Correct.
And then we'll have a week to, like Ryan said, look at it, think about it, talk to the members of the community. And then on August 4th, we'll come back and vote on it. I just want.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
On next Tuesday, we would have the opportunity to ask questions. That's why the admin team will be there.
Yeah, perfect.
Like, you just have to sit there and listen.
Okay.
Jamie?
Oh, you're muted.
Hi, so you can
There you
mute on Marion here. Got it. So just for clarity, because I've been getting a lot of questions as well. So on the 4th, we'll come back, and I think this is great, and thank you for everything, Marty. So, but then after the 4th, so is it safe to say that every single school in the state of Mass is going to be giving their plan on the 4th? Not that I guess we care about them, but we're worried about Longmeadow right now.
Yeah.
Everyone, and then DESE is going to turn around in 1 week every single school district plan back by the 11th. Is that correct? Is that what I was reading? I just want to make sure.
Sort of. I would modify it to say that our plans are due to DESE on August 10th. So we don't have to hit send on our plan to the Department of Education until August 10th. But it just so happens that we could have a school committee meeting on the 4th. And then we'd be in a position to hit send on August 10th. I think what the department has told us is that if we are unable to open in person, they'll want to see the evidence of that. So we would want to, if that is not the preferred reopening strategy, we would need to articulate the reasons why we can't reopen on an in-person basis.
And that goes for both 100% in person or a hybrid approach. You're saying that if we went fully online, they would expect some very clear evidence as to why that's completely appropriate for our town. Is what you're saying? Correct. So our expectation is they're only going to push back pretty hard if we were to come to them with a full online plan saying this is the best for our town, then it may be a little bit more explaining to do to Desi.
Perhaps.
Is that correct?
Yeah, perhaps. I think it's sort of to be determined. They'll be overwhelmed by the plans that are coming in from hundreds of communities. So I think there's much more local autonomy now than I imagined there would be back in early June. I think back in early June, you may have heard me say that the department was going to be very prescriptive. And though they've provided guidelines and support, it's not a very prescriptive approach that the department is following. They're letting communities do their own feasibility studies and determine which reopening strategy makes the most sense. But we will have to provide some evidence as to, if we are unable to open in person, we'll have to explain why. We'll have to explain why we choose any of the three plans, really. The other thing I'd say for anybody that might be listening is the committee would make a vote on August 4th, but given the fluidity of this situation, anything could change between August 4th and the first day of teaching and learning. And so I think that it would be wise for us to let the community know that that's the decision on August 4th. You might have a meeting later on in August, the winds might change, we might have different information, and you can make a different determination. This is not a fixed decision. We all have to recognize that we could be moving in and out of any of these arrangements.
I think is the point from Desi's point of view, have three plans because all three of them might be necessary.
Yeah, well said.
Anybody else? Question or comment?
Okay, I'll hit a few of the some of the other things that are sort of emerging. I want to start by mentioning that in your packet was what we are calling on a shorthand basis the StartStop document, and this is the department's protocols for responding to COVID-19 scenarios in schools. I do appreciate that it is a very, in this case, in this situation, it is a very prescriptive, very detailed 19-page document that will advise us on how to respond to COVID-19 scenarios. So I appreciate that it's very clearly spelled out. Tomorrow evening, Chairman Kelly and I will be attending the Longmeadow Board of Health meeting. They have this document. I sent it to them, and I think we'll want to know if the Board of Health has any expectations that are different from or go beyond the expectations that are in this document. My initial conversation with our health director was that she felt that the protocols that are in this document are reflective of existing practice by boards of health and Mass DPH. So there was nothing in there that I'd say surprised our health director, but we only got it on Friday afternoon, late Friday. So we're still diving into it. We still need to sit down with the administrators and our school nurses and other folks to dissect and go through this document. So that's the document that's in your packet. And if you have any questions, please let me know. The other thing, if I could, I'd like to share with you just one slide, actually two slides that maybe just help me organize my thinking in terms of how I'd like to explain a few things to you. So this document here is reflective of, I believe, the feedback we've received from the community, the feedback we've received from staff. It's reflective of some of the initial agreements that we have. And I think it will demonstrate that if we are in a hybrid or remote arrangement, that we will be able to have a much more robust remote learning program, one that will be very different than what families experienced back in the spring. So at sort of a high level, and we'll dive more into this next weekend, but these are some of the emerging features of remote learning, whether students are learning remote because they are in a remote cohort or because we are fully remote. So I don't need to read that for you. I'll leave it up, and if you have any questions on any of these, I'd be happy to provide some additional detail. So I'll just let it speak for itself, and if you have any thoughts or questions, or if anything needs additional explanation, just let me know.
Gianna?
Thanks for the superintendent. I would love to see in here somewhere the word accountability for so accountability for teachers, staff, students, families, you know, to be reinforcing safe practices at home. I just think somewhere the word accountability for everybody involved needs to be included.
Yeah, well said. I think that's something that we can definitely emphasize next week, because I think when we talk about the attendance requirements and the assessment requirements and the consistent predictable schedules and the defined instructional blocks, all those things, I think, point us towards a more accountable approach. So I think that's something, I agree, that's something that we hope is woven into this, and we definitely want to emphasize that.
Anyone else? I'm going to click through so I can see if you're waving your hand. Jamie?
Yep. Yeah, thanks. You're back over here. Yeah, yep. So Marty, on the start and stop document, I don't know, I've been getting a lot of questions on that, you know, well before they even put it out, DESE put it out, as to how that's all going to work. And I've read that document twice, and I probably have to read it a third time to make sure I pull it. Can you give like a 10,000 foot view of this? Obviously, you're just still diving into this, and there's a lot of detail on that, but just to give everyone kind of an overview of kind of what this looks like, kind of at a really high level.
Yeah, I appreciate that you saying that we're still diving into it. And I think our conversation with the Board of Health tomorrow will help. But I'd say at a high level, this is a document that helps us understand what we should do if there's a COVID-19 situation, if there's a symptomatic individual, whether that be at home, on the bus, at school. It provides some direction on contact tracing and how to respond to close contacts of someone that might be COVID-19 positive or symptomatic. I think one of the reassuring things that I took away from this was that the local Board of Health would be highly involved in any situation, and that they would be contacting the families of students that are COVID-19 symptomatic. They would be contacting the contacts of those students, and they would do the same for staff as well. And then a lot of the communication side of it, as I understand it, would still fall on the schools, but all of the community tracing and the community contact work and the outreach to affected families and students and staff is done by local DPH. And like you said, Jamie, I definitely need some more time with this. I think we need some more time with it as a staff, and I would look for an opportunity to sit with our nurses, the Board of Health, and perhaps even our school physicians to go through this and make sure that we understand it operationally. You know, one of the challenges is that it's July 15th, and, you know, we have to make sure that we have all these protocols well understood and tightly in place before we open up.
Bronwyn?
Just to follow up to Gianna's question, I know it says assessment and feedback. Is that going to include the grading? Like, a student's going to get grades? Or are we going to not be in the pass-fail mode?
Definitely not in pass-fail mode. This will not be engagement, unengagement. This will be sort of more familiar approaches to assessment and feedback with report cards, with common assessments. Definitely not pass-fail arrangements, and we heard that from students and staff that was an important part of the accountability approach.
Thanks.
Yeah. Some of it may have to, match, a blended learning environment. Some of, if we're the types of assessments that you would use in a fully in-person model may not completely match a remote model, but there will be some assessment accountability built into this, no doubt.
Gianna?
Yeah, just in looking at this further, and I know you said, Superintendent, that this is going to be obviously, this is just a big picture outline. But in spending hours with all that feedback and all those documents and everything for reopening, and recognizing themes and patterns that were emerging, all these bullets are pretty much like academic. Can we just add in or make sure that the theme of social emotional support is part of this bigger picture?
Well said. Yes, thank you. We'll be sure to incorporate that into next week's presentation. And if there are other things like that the committee wants some additional information on, we'd be happy to show how that's going to play out with whatever reopening plan it is that we're presenting on. I will note, I want to note the instructional technology, hardware and software. Mr. Shea was helpful to us in terms of showing us some of the latest technology that we're seeing in the higher ed world and how that might be applicable for us. And we've got a lot of teachers that are, experimented with some great instructional technology, a lot of it sort of presentation style software. So we think that there are some tools that we need to put in teachers' hands. Again, I know time is short here, and with that in mind, I think we would benefit. I don't know if DESE will give it to us, but I think we would benefit from having a waiver on the 180-day requirement and having some opportunity to, with the teachers in the building to start the year, to firm up some of the work that's bulleted here, but also even just to go over some of the health and safety protocols. So I don't know if we're going to get a waiver on that 180-day requirement, but I believe it would be helpful if that happened.
Anyone else? Jamie?
I think,
Oh, sorry,
I think
Nicole.
Nicole was
Okay.
first. I saw Nicole's
Okay.
hand first. Yes, go ahead.
You can go. No worries.
Mine will be nice and quick. Marty, on the StartStop plan that was already published, is that something that just more for the public? Can they go view that on the DESE site? Is that going to be published by us? When do they get to read that 19-page document? Is that eventually going to come out?
No,
Not that they probably want to, but they probably want to gander at certain parts of it.
Yeah, honestly, I think, you're right. I think for some people it might be TMI, but I think for a lot of folks, they'll want to know the details before they send their kids back. And Diane, if I could ask you to post this document up on the reopening webpage, if we haven't already. Sometimes you're ahead of me on those things.
I didn't, I was going to do it, but then I was waiting for some direction. So I will get it up there.
That's a great idea, Jamie. We'll post that up there, and I'll send it out in a blast to parents at the right time.
Perfect.
Thank you. Nicole?
I just wanted to first off say thank you to Dr. O'Shea. I know you and the admin team have been working night and day on figuring out all of the things related to the different scenarios for reopening. I'm curious as far as other language to maybe add into this along the way or to add into the presentation. I know this is still very in flux, so it might need to be something that waits until after that teacher work time that you were talking about a few minutes ago, but to kind of reassess what best practices will look like. They're very different possibly during a hybrid or remote learning style. So we might find that some of our best practices have kind of shifted, and what our expectations might be for what school looks like, both in that hybrid and remote learning, might be very different from what we're used to seeing in the classroom. So I'm just wondering if there can be a space to address that and discuss and make plans for that moving forward as well.
Yeah, we will, we have begun those conversations and started to kind of identify what best practice would look like. And we will fold that into the presentation next week so that you have some idea of our thinking in that area. So I appreciate that suggestion.
Thank you.
I'd also note, one of the things that has been helpful that the reopening task force has done is they have taken, to their great credit, and Nicole has been at the forefront of this, they've taken every email and every open-ended survey response sent by staff and families and put it into a document that sort of categorizes all the major themes and information that we've received. So we want to get that document to a place where we can share it back to you as a school committee, so you see and you're able to read what we've heard through that reopening email and through the task force and through the surveys. So we'll try and polish that up and get that to you ASAP.
And just quick shout out to say that also Gianna has been absolutely working night and day on it, as well as two other task force members, Kristen and Karen as well. So everybody's been working very hard on that task force to get as much information together for the school committee as we can.
It's a big document. It's great, very helpful.
Kevin.
Marty, my guess is that you guys on the task force or the admin team have already been thinking about some of these things, but I just want to throw them out there to make sure they show up in the presentation next week. And so here are just, a couple of things that I know I've been thinking about and talked to some people in town about. One, is there any discussion about some sort of quarantine before people go back in person, if we are going back in person? To me, it seems like that's an essential thing to make sure that people don't come back from a hotspot state and the next day they're in school. That seems like very risky. And I think if we could advise everybody, parents, teachers, kids, whatever, everybody, that this should happen, I think that's something that should be in our plan. Are we thinking about phased opening? To combat something like this, are we thinking if we had a plan where we were going to open remotely just to see what happens in the community when things start going on, what does the phasing look like to go from remote to in-person? Again, I think this is probably something you're going to do already, so I apologize for throwing that out there. Are we thinking about different plans for different levels? Might we have a plan that looks different for the elementary than it does for the middle, than for the high school, so that we're not constrained by saying we can only have one plan that fits all the schools in the district? And are we thinking about prioritization of which students return to school? If we have a hybrid, might we think about which students really need to be in school? And again, I'm not sure exactly how to prioritize that, but really thinking about prioritizing the kids we think really need that in-person attention versus kids we think might not need that as much. So anyway, those are things that I'm sure will come up next week, but I just wanted to throw them out there to make sure they end up as part of our discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, this is so helpful, this discussion, to kind of understand what's important to the committee and by extension, what's important to the community. So I wrote down so far, I have 6 things on my list here that we'll weave into the presentation. I will say on the quarantine issue, thank you to Mr. Mazza for instituting a self-certification process that mirrors the town's approach. So already full year staff have to self-certify before they come into the building every morning. And that self-certification is, Tom can explain it in more detail, but it essentially, one of the provisions is that the individual self-certifies as testifying that he or she has not been to one of the restricted travel states. So that practice is in place. There might be ways that we can improve upon that before school starts as well. The other thing I would note, I want to, if I could just back up a little bit, our obligation to you and to the community is still to explain what a full in-person opening would look like. I think it sort of goes without saying that there are some significant obstacles associated with a full in-person opening, whether you're going with a 3-foot plan or a 6-foot plan. You know, we'll get into more detail next week, but essentially at the core of the problem is that the more people, the more spread out kids need to be, the more staff you need and the more supervision. So it's just that there's some inherent problems that are associated with the full in-person model. Again, we are exploring it and developing it and doing the feasibility work, but I would want you to know that, you know, we're seeing some challenges there as we work through it. And then the other piece of that is the more people you put in a building, the more dense it is, and the more chance that there's close contact, the more chance that you might be in some type of shutdown arrangement. So we'll get into more of that next week. But if there's anything that you'd like to know relative to the full opening, please let us know either tonight or between now and next Tuesday. The last thing I'd like to show you is relates to potential directions for hybrid arrangements, and where we're tentatively going right now is to sort of think about 2 cohorts, an A and B cohort. It would be alphabetically defined with some allowances for be sure that families are kept together. We wouldn't want members of the same household to be assigned to different cohorts. And then what you will hear next week are the strategies that are developing at each level to ensure that we're limiting cohort mixing. It is, you know, it's difficult at all levels. It's, you know, the least difficult at the elementary. It's slightly less difficult at the high school, but it's slightly more difficult, and it's very difficult at the high school level. So, but you'll hear about the strategies that we've come up with administratively to ensure that there's limited mixing of students within each cohort, is probably a better way of saying that. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about relative to the hybrid cohorts that we would have to establish under a hybrid arrangement.
One thing I would like to point out to keep in mind is sometimes people in the same household don't have the same last name.
Yes.
So somebody in IT can check the addresses to make sure that the household is all going at the same time. That would probably be helpful.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we definitely would not want to split up families.
Anybody else with another question or comment? Okay, thank you for the update, Marty.
All right. The next piece of that then relates to athletics, which is an important part of our work here in Longmeadow Public Schools, and for your help on kind of evaluating where we are with athletics. Athletic Director Mike Capitasto has joined us, and he's here to offer a little snapshot of where we are with regard to interscholastic sports. And if you can hear us, we'll turn it over to you, and they may have some questions for you. Mr. Capitasto, can you hear us?
You hear me, Marty?
I think we have you now.
Okay. I don't think I got the video set up. Sorry if I
Okay.
don't, but I'm at an AD's meeting right now, but I just want to give you a quick update on of where we're at. The MIAA actually had a board of directors meeting today, this afternoon, and they came out with 3 recommendations. The first recommendation is to adhere to the governor's task force guidance on the different levels and tiers of sports, which I sent, which we emailed earlier. The second recommendation was to push the start of fall sports back to at least September 14th to allow student athletes to get accustomed to whatever model each district will do. And the last recommendation is just for them to come out with a they're going to come up and finalize their meeting after DESI comes out with their guidelines on schools. Within 3 days of DESI's guidelines, they will finalize fall sports. So that's kind of where we're at. You know, there's some positive to that, but you know, we're at an AD's meeting right now, and there's a lot of questions with no answers to them, and everybody's still waiting. The MIAA has a COVID-19 task force that is working directly with the governor's office in DESI, and they're meeting a couple times a week, going over every scenario they can, and you know, for hoping for a safe return this fall for our students and staff. So questions that that might be out there.
I have a question. Is the guidance on September 14th the start of practice or the start of competition?
That will be the actual first day of preseason. So and that's what we were just talking about today. Are they going to shorten preseason, or are they going to keep it long enough? And again, that's just an answer we don't have right now. But September 14th would be the first official date of a Longmeadow High School sanctioned practice.
Kevin?
Mike, thanks for joining us. I just want to make sure that I read the document you sent along and interpreted it correctly. Based on what I read, it seems like we might have some sports that happen and some sports that don't happen, depending on the level that they're assessed by the state. For example, again, if I read it correctly, it is entirely possible that there will be no soccer and no football, but there might be sports that don't involve as much physical contact. Can you just talk a little bit about that? I think it's important for the community to understand what might and might not be possible based on the levels of various sports, especially for fall sports. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Kevin. Good question. Yeah, so right now the state is the state of Massachusetts. The governor has put sports into tiers: tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, based on the amount of probably physical contact, I'm guessing. Why they separated those. So if we were to start today, soccer, football, and competitive cheer would not be allowed to go forward with their season based on where we are with the phase of level 3. I mean, phase 3 level, I think we're in level 3 right now, which again, those high tier sports can only do level 1, which would be limited practice with limited amount of people around it. So the phases, there's 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 4 is a full, complete, you can get going with everything, and everybody in a low or moderate risk sport is in phase 1, 2, and 3, and I believe some might be in phase 4 now, but the high risk sports are still only in phase level 1 of phase 3, which limits them on what they can and cannot do. So Hopefully that answers. So, for example, we would cross country, golf, field hockey, and volleyball would be allowed to go if we were to start today. And that would leave soccer, football, and competitive cheer with the unknown of what would happen. Would they still be allowed to practice? Those are some of the things that are being asked across the state today that we don't have any answers for yet.
Nicole?
Can you speak, thank you for joining us also. Would you be able to speak to registration for those sports? How does this sort of uncertainty impact the registration process, just so families can get a picture of what to expect and how they'll know if when their student is playing, if reimbursements are necessary, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, it really hasn't, thanks, Nicole. It really hasn't changed anything. We're moving forward as we are completely going in the fall. And then as guidelines start to come out, we will obviously update our community and families and make any adjustments from there. So yeah, again, we were just talking at our AD's meeting. We have to move forward as business as normal and be prepared for everything to happen, and then we can adjust as guidelines come out. So we would still move forward with a full registration of all the sports, and then once they make those decisions, and then we'll start to, if we have to make refunds, we'll make refunds and go from there. But we want to have a list of student athletes prior to, so so we can communicate with them, and our coaches could communicate with them if needed. That's why we do ask everybody to still register, like we are still going to have a fall season.
Okay, thank you.
Tiana?
Thanks, Mr. Capitasto. Quick question about the busing, because, you know, I read the document from the MIAA and, you know, it talks about the different sports and the risks there. But how are we going to mesh the busing, the new busing requirements with if competitions are happening in other you know, so I'm not explaining this well, but busing.
Yep. So Desi on their meeting, one of the Desi was represented on the meeting today, and they were supposed to, they said to the MIA, they'll hopefully have some guidance later in this week or early next week when it revolves around busing. But yes, that's going to be an issue no matter what. You might, and again, we were just talking about this at our AD's meeting. Do the state of Connecticut, they're putting all their sub-varsity stuff on the weekend, where there's more parents that can drive and maybe doing some jamborees, and we're slowly looking at that as well. But really, we don't have an answer yet because there hasn't been any guidelines to that, strict guidelines to that. But yes, that is going to be an issue in the fall, busing. Yep, absolutely. Mr. Maz and I were speaking on that, and it is going to cause a issue because we're already limited as we is with the amount of buses we were able to provide prior to this happening. So we're really gonna have to look at the guidelines when they come out and assess what we can and cannot do.
Thank you.
Amy?
Yeah. Hey, Mike, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
Just a quick question. During the MIAA meeting, has there been any discussion or push to actually align the sports between all these states? Obviously, we're in New England and we're pretty, and I know we don't generally play across state, but the state of Connecticut, the state of Rhode Island is completely different when it comes from levels of sports as to what they deem as high risk and medium risk and low risk than the state of Mass. You know, for obvious reasons that could create some issues. Has there been any conversation about actually aligning with the local states around here?
Yep. That is. They've had those conversations, especially in the task force. And again, they said today they're not married to any decision, and everything's going to be on the table. So they are, and they said today they will. They don't want to look at what's happening out in California, Missouri, down south. They want to look what's happening in our region only. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that they do align, because all the other states are different with their levels and tier, and we are a little more strict in some of our tiers, but they have not finalized that yet. So they're still considering those moves. Yes.
Okay.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ryan.
Next on our agenda are the administrative reports. Superintendent report.
The only other, you heard enough from me, I'd say. I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have. The only thing I neglected to mention is, and I'd ask if Tom could assist here. There are additional funding opportunities that we are exploring to help us cover some of the COVID-related reopening costs. And Tom was in on a webinar last Friday, I think it was. So if I could cede my time to Tom, if that's okay.
Of course, Tom.
Yeah, thank you. So as Marty indicated, there is an additional grant that the state is providing. It's calling it the Coronavirus Relief Fund Grant. It is intended to be a supplement to the CARES and Remote Learning Technology Essentials grants, which we already received some funds under the CARES grant, and we did apply for the Remote Learning Technology grant just last week, so we're still waiting to hear on that. This new grant, this Coronavirus Relief Fund, is it's designated at $225 per student, so it would equate to just under $630,000 for the district, and it functions a little differently than previous grants in that the funds that we would be awarded would have to be expended by or committed by December 2020. So it really wouldn't allow for using of grant funds to pay for additional staffing to support whatever model we adopt for learning come the fall. And the other piece that the grant stipulates is that any of the expenditures have to be related to the coronavirus. So it can be kind of broad, that it can be for professional development, it can be technology, it can be safety, health and safety materials and equipment, but it has to be coronavirus related, whereas the CARES grant is more vague and kind of is allowed to be used basically for pretty much any educational related function. So we may come back and amend our CARES funds that we received earlier to use some of those funds for other items than what we initially intended, and use some of the expenses that we're incurring under the CARES grant and move them onto this Coronavirus Relief Fund grant. I think the other piece with this new grant is it allows you to take expenditures that were incurred back to the beginning of the pandemic or early March and transfer them onto this grant. Whereas the CARES Act, where you basically you had to submit your application and could start incurring expenses upon notification of award. So we will be submitting a grant sometime in the next few weeks. Applications are due by August 31st, but I would expect that we'll have something to DESE in the next couple of weeks. So happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Kevin.
Tom, thanks for the update. Just one thing I want to put a plug in for, if we are able to get that funding, I would love for us to be able to support teachers with what they would need to prepare for and teach remotely. Just from my experience, the ability to have a tablet to use as a way to visually communicate with remote students was transformative in the way I was able to teach remotely. And I think if we could really think about using funds for stuff like that, I think it could have a dramatic impact on improving the curricular delivery for students who are remote.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, do we have any information on the companies that make all the PPE and the hand sanitizer and all the other stuff that everyone in America is going to need? Are they making enough?
It's a daily conversation we're having with vendors about orders that have been placed months ago and whether or not we're actually going to receive the material. We're following up with other companies to see what they have for availability. So we do have 50,000 disposable masks. We've received them already. We have some face shields and some disposable gloves. We obviously are looking for more of all of those items. I think there are some areas of concern and whether or not we'll have a sufficient inventory, especially around wipes, sanitizing wipes, even hand sanitizer. So we are looking for other sources, other companies. I mean, we seem to get 10 emails a day from various companies about their availability, but so we are following up and trying to make sure we can secure and have on hand all those necessary items.
No, this is going to be a silly question because it involves DESE giving answers. But is there any guideline on what we might have to do should we run out of things that are part of our plan, like hand sanitizer? I know I've seen plenty of shows on the episodes on CNN and on the nightly news where they show these schools where the kids are washing and sanitizing every time they go in and out of any room. That's a lot of stuff. So do we have to shut down when we're out? Is there any sort of guidance on you're out of safety equipment, therefore you're now fully remote?
I haven't seen anything as of yet, but I don't know if Marty has any more information on it than I do, but I haven't seen anything. I think the state's been trying to assist districts in working with companies to give the companies information about the needs of the district. That doesn't help in terms of the supply chain and having the raw materials available in order to have the necessary items in stock when they're needed. As you indicated, Ryan, I mean, it's not just schools, it's healthcare facilities all over the country, and especially down south and out west where they're seeing such a rise in the cases, a demand for these type of PPE. So I'm not aware of any guidance, but Marty, I don't know if you have information that I'm not aware of.
I know specific guidance, but I think it probably goes without saying that if we don't have all the PPE and sanitization equipment and supplies, then that's a deal breaker. I mean, that it's critical that we obtain all these supplies. And as Ryan said, you got every school district in America is competing for supplies in some cases. So we will, that'll be a factor in whatever plan we put forth. I would want to put forth a plan that reflects confidence that we're going to have all the PPE and sanitization equipment and supplies that we need.
Thank you. Anyone else with other questions? All right, seeing none. Just writing a little note for myself. Sorry. School committee chair report. I said most of what I wanted to say back in the announcements and recognitions portion. But one thing I do want to talk about is, as a committee, our goals. What we're going to do is we're going to send out a Google Doc, a non-shared Google Doc to all of us so that we can put down into the computer, into the Google Doc ideas for the goals that we should have as a committee this year. So you're going to send in your ideas, and then Marty's going to take a look at it with Diane's assistant to categorize them so that they can put into areas, so that when we get together to discuss the goals, which is going to be in August, it'll be the agenda item for one of our August meetings, which I'm hoping we are going to get to do in person, which is likely to be, I think it's the 18th. Is that correct, Diane? Is that the day we were talking about? The 18th of August, which would be hopefully an in-person meeting where we could all discuss these efficiently if they are categorized for us. So expect that coming to you soon so that we can discuss the goals that we're going to have for this year. And that'll be a part of that agenda there for the 18th. That is it for me. Armin, student report.
Yeah, so I've been talking to a few of my constituents, especially now that our suggestion box is inaccessible, to discuss anti-racism efforts in town. And a few students pointed me towards a social media page where LPS students and alumni of color could discuss some of their experiences in the district with racism. And I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's very eye-opening. Personally, it was for me. And it's interesting to hear from those students who have been the most directly affected by racism in the district. And I know that the Anti-Racism Coalition is already working on this, but I think it would be great if we could kind of unify our efforts in fighting racism between admin and students. And I've been thinking of ways to best deal with that, and especially after talking with students. I think that one thing we could consider is sharing some of those stories on the anti-racism page on the LPS website, kind of as a way of saying, you know, these are the stories of people affected by racism in the district, and here's what we're committed to doing to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And I think that, you know, many other districts are also dealing with their responses to racism. But I think that if we kind of expose problems in our own community and say how we're committed to making sure they don't happen again, that we'd kind of be like a real leader in solving this problem. So just something to consider, and I'd be willing to discuss the idea further if it's possible and if there's interest in it.
That's great. Thank you, Armin.
Mm-hmm.
And you would be able to let everybody know that website so that you maybe email it to us?
Sure, I could do that.
Well, thank you very much.
And I'd be happy to chat with you, Armin. Whenever, just reach out to me. We'll figure out a time to talk and think about how we might connect to the stories that are on that page.
Great. Thank you.
Is there, hey, Armin, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So anybody else has one for him first. Is there a club or a group already in the high school that might be poised to be the leader on this topic, or do we maybe need to create another club?
There is one club that I know of. I believe it's Unity Club that Mr. Landers has already discussed, talked with, and started an active dialogue with. And yeah, I'm sure they would lead this project if we talked to some leadership in that club.
Great. I'd love to find out, Marty, does that club ever go to the middle or elementary schools to discuss things with them?
I'd have to find out for you, Ryan.
Okay.
And the other club that I'm thinking about is the peer leadership group.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if Sue or Tom, if you have anything that you're thinking of, but that's a really good idea to bridge the gap, high school to middle, and then tap into some of the existing structures and kind of create some collaboration between the group that you're in touch with, Armin, and then some student groups here in Longmeadow.
That's great. So that middle school clubs and maybe if there's an elementary club, there might be a different version of it, especially for the elementary level, but then they could all coordinate. I think Armin makes a great point that the different groups in town coordinate with one another will be much more effective than having a group here and a group here and a group here all trying to do the same thing. If we get together and share ideas, which is why Marty and I went to the LARC meeting the other day. I think that will be much more effective. So thank you, Herman, and look forward to hearing from that group and what the work the kids in the high school and the middle school level are doing on this. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Next up are other reports. Do we have a report from LPVEC?
No, we're not meeting until August.
Okay, energy and sustainability.
We're meeting on Thursday.
Thank you. Open space. Can't hear you, James.
No update.
Thank you. Subcommittee reports. Finance, policy, and evaluation don't have any reports. Is that correct? Anybody from there speak differently? So we do have a report from the curriculum subcommittee. Gianna?
I'm actually going to defer to superintendent on that.
Okay.
We had 3 items that were in front of the curriculum sub that met last week. One related to anti-racist education and practices, the other related to middle school math acceleration, and the third item was the textbook and curriculum adoption process. So with regard to anti-racist education, I think there was some widespread agreement around continuing with our work of sort of inventorying the collection of materials that we put in front of students. I provided some background on some of the existing practices that are in place and some of the foundations that we can build on. We talked a little bit about the meeting that we had with the Longmeadow Anti-Racism Coalition and thought about some of the ways that the school committee can use its influence to get us pointed in the proper direction on this. And those areas obviously relate to policy, budget, and curriculum adoption. We talked a little bit about the idea of, how do you make sure that we have anti-racism woven into the experiences of kids from pre-K to 12. I think some discussion around, not wanting to grab some sort of plug and play curriculum that is layered on top of existing work, but rather how do you make our commitment to anti-racism kind of authentically woven into the teaching and learning that happens on a regular basis. So I think, with the CLE work, with the Center for Leadership and Educational Equity work that will start in the fall, I think that's another opportunity for us to move forward. And my recommendation might be for policy sub also to take a look at any policies that need updating in this area. And we could reach out to the Mass Association of School Committees for some guidance there as well. The second item related to middle school math acceleration, and we have an avenue in place where middle school students can place into a math class above grade level. The curriculum subcommittee asked us to go back and sort of review that practice, review the approach that we take to having students place out of a middle school math class. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We want to make sure that it's sort of a holistic review process, that it's not based on a single test, and that that the expectations are clear and widely known to staff and to families and to students. So we think that we'll need some time on this. Obviously, we've got some other pressing priorities, and I think the thought was that maybe sometime if I have the date correct, sometime in October, we would bring that matter back to the curriculum sub with an explanation of how we're going to change that process. And then the third topic of the curriculum sub related to textbook adoption and curriculum adoption. And I actually had to step out of a meeting at that time. Nicole and Gianna and Sue were carried on with that conversation, so. I'll defer.
We decided that, well, we talked about the textbook adoption policies as they stand, and then it might be time to give them kind of an overhaul, look over, see where we are. And so Sue and Tom and I are scheduled to meet later in August after having some time to kind of review the current policies and have a discussion about what some of these policy changes might look like moving forward. Sue, I'm not sure if you had any more maybe to add detail-wise.
No, we talked about just kind of procedure, things that we did before we chose a text. So just some looking at some of the procedures along with the policies. So we'll meet, I think we have a date to meet sometime in August and then come together as a committee probably in early October, late September, something around this.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for curriculum sub? Kevin?
Yeah, I want to follow up on two of the items. So let's do the textbook and curricular adoption first, which is, I mean, I know if Susie were here, she would, well, I guess she would speak up on this, but so you mentioned, you know, looking into the policy on doing that. I wonder if you could just speak on that, because that was one of the things we spent a long time on, either last meeting or the meeting before, just so we understand what the policy is, because it seemed like the committee wanted the policy to be there is curriculum first and then the textbook adoption follows. Is that our policy or is that not our policy?
So that's not our policy on textbook adoption. It's pretty quiet on that front. So we talked about adding procedures that come prior to the textbook adoption. So one of those procedures would to be, you know, to create a fully articulated curriculum prior to the adoption of a textbook. And Susie was at that meeting with us.
So is that something then that the committee would need to vote on so that we could make that the policy?
So not on the procedure, but on the policy. I think we'll look at the policy, meet as a curriculum subcommittee, and then send it over to policy. Nicole, is that what we decided? She's
sorry,
muted.
I forgot I was muted.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that was where we landed. We talked about when policy would need to be involved. And we kind of came to the decision that we should really map out a plan and then bring it to policy subcommittee to see what their input would be and then move it back again as needed.
Excellent, thank you. And then I did want to spend just a little bit of time on the anti-racism issue. And I want to thank the subcommittee and also especially Armin for bringing this up. I mean, this is such an important topic. We need to continue to have this on our agenda, and I'm glad to see that it was on this agenda, and we need to continue to do that. I really do want to follow up on one of the things that you said, Marty, which is, you know, I'm not convinced, well, I'll speak for myself. I do not know what we are doing right now in terms of what our students are exposed to for anti-racism education, for authors of color, scientists of color. I have no idea what we're doing. Well, I wouldn't say no idea. I know what limited stuff my kids tell me, which I'm not convinced is all the stuff they're doing. But again, I just feel very ignorant of what is going on. And my guess is that that's true for most of the parents in the district. So I think it would be really helpful for the committee and for parents in the community to know what are we doing right now. And then I really think it would be helpful for us to do some sort of analysis. The one that comes to my mind is a SWOT analysis, right? Like strength, weakness, opportunity, and threats, about where do we move forward? Because I think that's a lot of what we've all been hearing from the community is we need to know where we are, and then we need to come up with a plan to move to a place that's better. And so anyway, I just think it would be helpful if that's something we can have on a future agenda so that we can continue to push this really important topic. Thank you.
Great point, Kevin. Thank you. And it's going to be it's not a full answer, but when we're doing our goals discussion, I know that that's going to be something around this is going to be a goal that I'm going to propose. And if others propose, then that'll be a big part of what we discuss when we're doing that, so that we do all keep it in front of us. Like you said, it should be on every meeting, and what we're doing should be on every meeting. Gianna, you had your hand up at one point. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Superintendent and Nicole for summarizing, and Sue for adding in the foundation of those conversations. I did just want to point out too that we talked a lot about that it's not just the responsibility of, you know, the social studies teachers or the history teachers or the English teachers. And Kevin mentioned, you know, scientists. So it will be, you know, kind of pervasive between all contents and all subjects. You know, Marty mentioned that, you know, we're thinking about grade levels and you know, elementary, middle, and high school and kind of bridging that gap, which again, Armin, thank you for that. That was a great idea. But also within the different subjects themselves.
Good point. Nicole?
And maybe Marty or Sue might be able to expand on this, but I recall we were also talking about sort of looking at some of the places in the curriculum where things could be adjusted, added in, changed over, et cetera, and that there already kind of being cohorts of teachers who are looking at that issue more thoroughly. So just open that door for you guys to maybe.
Yep. Yeah, one of the, I may have mentioned this last meeting, I apologize if I did, that we had our, not that it's the responsibility of our ELA teachers, but they had done a inventory of the middle school collection and audited the collection to identify the topics that we were putting in front of students, the orientation, the racial background of the authors of the novels and texts that kids were reading. And from that came some end of year ordering to kind of diversify the collection. And I think that type of work needs to happen in other disciplines and at other grade levels. There's a group of teachers that came together this summer also around to do a book club on how to be an anti-racist. So quite a few elementary school teachers have taken that on themselves without any sort of direction. And so I'm looking forward to hearing sort of the outcome of that work and how we might apply that to our work more generally.
And the high school has also taken a look at their collection over the last couple of years for diversifying in ELA, and really we need to broaden that to all the subject areas. And the folks who are in that book club, the author did a webinar last night, and so many of us logged on to the webinar. It was really, really good. So you know, all the things like that we can put in are really important, but really weaving it into the fabric of our daily lives and how we respond to it is super important. So I'm happy to hear that it might make it in as a goal for you all.
Yes, Nicole.
Just a note too that I was sad I didn't get to make it to that webinar, but I have heard today that it is still available to watch on YouTube. So if anybody wanted to check it out, I can track down the email or the address for it. But apparently it's available for viewing if you weren't able to actually be there.
Nice.
And one, I guess to add on this topic, one suggestion that strikes me as being important, similar to middle school audit of their books, would be a suggestion that maybe all of the departments do an audit on where would be relevant, possible, and meaningful for the topic of anti-racism, or the examples of diverse scientists. Events in social studies is an obvious one, but math and science would be ones that maybe they have to take a look at. All the groups may be doing an audit of their own curricula. Yes, Sue?
So we have, we're going to offer phase 3 of our kind of curriculum work for the summer, and one of the focus areas will be for some of the folks or teachers to highlight authors of color, scientists of color, and finding places in their current curriculum where they can highlight those diverse folks. So that'll be sometime.
That'd be great if we could eventually, again, similar to the topic of all this work being cohesive, if we could hear from the departments, or it could all be collected and shared with us, so we can find out what they're all doing, and vertically and horizontally, so everybody knows what they're doing in their own building and at the other levels. I think that would be very helpful for us. Thank you very much. Anybody, any other questions or comments for curriculum sub? Seeing none. Our next ongoing business, compensation and benefits authorization. Tom, briefly discuss and tell us that this is the thing that we keep doing every meeting.
Yep. So thank you to the school committee for your patience in supporting this vote for the last 4 months. It is authorizing the payroll in this remote setting that we've been working under since mid-March. I think just to provide some clarity, that school year staff received their final compensation back at the end of June with the last payroll in June. So in the last meeting, you were basically just authorizing pay for full year staff that were still in a remote work setting. I anticipate that this will be the last agenda that we will need this language, at least for now. We may need to bring it back depending upon where things land come the fall, but at least for the next few meetings, we probably won't need you to authorize the payroll, as full year staff are back in the buildings effective yesterday.
Thank you. Anybody have a question for Tom? Interested in reading a motion?
I move that the school committee authorize that for the pay period ending Friday, July 17th, 2020, the district pay all current employees not on leave that portion of their base pay and the portion of any annual stipend to which they are entitled, consistent with the effective collective bargaining agreement or individual contract of employment, or in the case of unrepresented at-will employees who have not been furloughed, to the same amount as paid for the week ending July 3rd, 2020.
There's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on this? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote. Kevin?
Yes.
Bronwyn?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Gianna?
Yes.
Yes, for me as well. New business. I'm going to read a few things so everybody understands this and so that our audience knows what we're talking about. So the MASC sends out resolutions to school committees. We can consider them, we cannot consider them. I put them before you because they are important topics, and I didn't want to make a decision for anybody about them not being on our agenda. So I'll explain for everybody what they are, and then I will read the resolutions so that our audience can also hear what we're talking about. The MASC Board of Directors recommended that the attached resolutions be forwarded to Resolutions Committee for consideration of the entire MASC membership. The resolutions address funding for the expenses related to COVID-19, including supplies and equipment needed to help schools reopen safely, that originated with some of our Connecticut Valley school committees, and B, the response to issues of racism, equity, and diversity that have moved center stage as a result of the events across the country during the past few weeks. And this it tells us who developed them, but they're not from Longmeadow, so we're not worried about that. Because of the urgency and timeliness of both issues, we are encouraging districts to consider them locally and respond by forwarding them to Governor Baker, Education Secretary Pizer, our local state senators and reps, Senate President Karen Spilka, and House Speaker Robert DeLeo, and that we do so immediately during this fiscal and public health crisis and the call for social and economic equity. The hope is that providing more information on the 2020 MASC Delegate Assembly, which will consider these and a range of other important public policy issues, it is offered to our school committee for consideration at this time. So the first one is on anti-racism. So I'm going to read it for everybody. It's in your packet, but I'm going to read it because so the public can hear what we're talking about. Whereas the schools have the responsibility to equip students with their civil right of obtaining a free and appropriate public education. It is the responsibility of each school to ensure we create a welcoming community for all students. Whereas it is the responsibility that every district provide to all district staff, including school committee members, annual professional development on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And whereas every district will commit to recruiting and retaining a diverse and culturally responsive teaching workforce. And whereas every district will examine their policies for institutional systemic racialized practices and implement change with sustainable policies that are evidence-based. And whereas every district will incorporate into their curriculum the history of racial oppression and works by Black authors and works from diverse perspectives. And whereas we as school district leaders can no longer remain silent to the issues of racism and hate that continue to plague our public and private institutions. Resolved that Longmeadow and all the school districts in the Commonwealth must guarantee that racist practices are eradicated and diversity, equity, and inclusion is embedded and practice for our students, families, faculty, and staff. We must ensure our own school culture and that of every district in the Commonwealth is anti-racist, that acknowledges that all lives cannot matter until Black lives matter. So that is the exact wording. We as a group do not have to adopt as is. We can discuss it here. It's in your packet so you can see it. We can adopt as is. Obviously, this is a topic that we have been discussing over the past few meetings, and it's something that we have all expressed commitment to. But if anyone has any questions or comments they would like to make, I welcome them now. If not, we can have a vote on whether or not, I'm just going to read from our agenda. The MIAA has asked school districts to consider and approve these two resolutions as provided. If approved, they're also asking districts to send them to the list of recipients that I already spoke about. If there's no discussion, we can have a motion if someone is interested in reading that.
I move that the school committee vote to support the anti-racism resolution as read.
Is there a second?
Second.
Sorry, second. I keep forgetting my mic is off.
So there's a motion and a second. Any discussion on this resolution? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. Kevin?
Yes.
Bronwyn?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Gianna?
Yes.
Yes, from me as well. The second one is on COVID-19 state funding. Whereas if schools are to reopen this fall in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is the responsibility of each school district to do so safely and responsibly. Whereas it is the responsibility of the state to ensure that each school district is able to pay for the enormous additional staffing, transportation, and material expenses required to do this. And whereas the state cannot expect mandatory COVID-19 safety guidelines to be followed without also ensuring that each school district has the funds required to implement these guidelines. Therefore, let it be resolved that the state must guarantee every school district full reimbursement for whatever COVID-19 expenses are required to follow state mandates. We must ensure a statewide school reopening that is safe, responsible, and equitable. There can be no unfunded mandates for COVID-19. That is what the resolution reads. Can anyone read the motion maybe?
I move the school committee vote to support the COVID-19 state funding resolution as read.
Is there a second?
Second.
So discussion, anybody have any questions? Yes, Kevin.
I just wonder if Tom could weigh in on this from his perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why we wouldn't support the resolution. I mean, it makes total sense that with all of the increased costs that districts will be incurring based on the provisions and health and safety standards that we're going to be implementing, that there be additional funding to make sure those costs are being covered. So I see no issue with why we wouldn't support this resolution.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone else? I'd point out that this is, I mean, it's symbolic, but we're also sending it to our elected officials. Obviously, we can't mandate that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts give us money, but we are pointing by, I think by approving this resolution, we're pointing out the need and that we're paying attention to it and letting our reps know that we want them advocating for this. So like Tom said, I don't know if there's a downside for us supporting this. There's no other questions. I'll call for a vote. Kevin?
Yes.
Bronwyn?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Gianna?
Yes.
Yes, for me as well. There is no executive session this evening. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'm sorry, Marty has his hand up before we adjourn. You're muted, Marty.
I'm sorry. Just to let you know, we'll post the resolution to the new anti-racism page on the district website. Okay.
Thank you. Kevin, you were saying?
Said so moved.
Is there a second to the movement to adjourn?
Second.
Second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. Kevin?
Yes.
Bronwyn?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Nicole,
Yes.
Gianna?
Yes.
Yes, for me as well. Thank you very much for everybody for coming. We'll see you next time.